Hello, welcome to Blue Table Talks. My name is Sherry Hubert. I'm the Associate Dean of Admissions here at Duke University's Fuqua School of Business, and so excited to launch this new series. Blue Table Talk will be an ongoing series that we provide that really helps us looking greater insight into the student experience here at Fuqua. And so our very first session, we're excited, in recognition of Hispanic Heritage Month, we've invited two students here, and the title of the session is Latino, Latina, Latinx, Estamos Presentes en Fuqua, which translates, we are here at Fuqua. And joining me are two amazing students, Cynthia Loera and Tomás Alberto Peña. Bienvenidos, ¿cómo estás hoy?
Andamos bien, yes.
Muy bien, muy bien. We're going to get into, it's so funny, we were just having just really robust conversations because the purpose of Blue Table Talk is to really dive into some real talk around issues that are important to our students during their experience here at Fuqua. And so I'm going to push the edge a little bit. I really want Cynthia and Tomas to feel comfortable in sharing their perspectives with you, the audience, and with us as we explore what it means to be Latino, Latina here at Fuqua. To get things started, though, I'd love to have you to introduce yourselves. Just give the audience a little bit more information about who you are, what you are passionate about, where you come from. So, Tomas, do you want to start? Por favor?
Of course, yeah. Hello, everyone. My name is Tomás Peña. I am an MQM student in the Master Quantitative Management Business Analytics program. I'm originally from a small town in South Texas called Roma. So Rio Grande Valley represents 956. In my undergrad, I went to Trinity University in San Antonio, Texas. I studied business analytics, data science, and finance, so very similar to the master's program here at Fuqua. And a fun fact about me is I'm absolutely obsessed with reality TV. I can watch it for hours on Netflix.
Okay. Yeah. Favorite one?
Ooh, Selling Sunset, of course. I think that's amazing. Yeah.
Cynthia?
My name is Cynthia. I'm originally from a really small town, California, Central Valley. So we have the small town thing going on. Right. My hometown has 3 stoplights. It doesn't have a hospital. About 50% of our population are Corcoran State Prison inmates. Just to kind of paint the picture of how small my town really is. I started working in the cotton and tomato fields when I was 16 to kind of help make ends meet. I'm a daughter of immigrants, so both of my parents immigrated here from Mexico, which has really colored my perspective in the U.S. I knew that education was kind of my way out of poverty and the way of my family to support them. And so I went to UCLA for undergrad. I really centered myself in community work and community service and found myself in working in politics after graduating. So I did some local campaigns, a state campaign, and eventually got recruited to work for Obama's re-election campaign. I moved to Colorado to help support and relieve campaign workers who had lived through a mass shooting, the first mass shooting back in 2012 there in Aurora, Colorado. And it really shifted the way that I kind of saw how we help community. I moved away from politics and worked in the nonprofit sector, where I then very quickly began to feel kind of tokenized. I was the only woman of color that worked in the space. And then I pivoted again into higher education. I started in the human resources and budget space and then moved into advising and ended my career in higher education in innovative programming. So I created programs for low-income minoritized folks, the folks who have kind of even slipped through the cracks in those spaces. So formerly incarcerated, foster care students, parenting students. And I really loved the work that I was doing. But during the pandemic, as much of everyone's life changed, my life really changed. I went from living in LA to moving back home and helping my dad readjust to kind of what this world looked like. When I went back home, it was like going back in time. Mm-hmm. There were still 3 stoplights. There was still no hospital. Our population was still just as small as it was before. I had to get Wi-Fi in my parents' household for the first time because I was still working remotely. And it was just such a stark difference from the work that I was doing. And it helped me realize that, like, as much as I was like pouring all of my, innovative programs and resources into this urban community, like I hadn't really done much for the rural community that I came from and that raised me, right? And this resource allocation inequity really helped empower me to come to business school. So in the long term, I want to help bridge that gap In the short term, I want to understand the private sector. I want to work in a space that helps me solve some problems, makes me feel equipped to be able to solve this greater problem. But I'm happy to join you here, Sherry and Thomas and Tomas, and happy to answer some questions today.
Absolutely. Let's get into it. I'm going to start with a question that, is on my mind. I know we talked about this a little bit before the session began, but and either one of you can answer or both, because I think this is also educational. I'm curious if Hispanic Heritage Month holds significance for you, and if so, why or how, and if not, why not?
Yeah, I can get us started. And I think when we think about Hispanic Heritage Month, some people might be confused on why it's from September 15th all the way to October 15th, but it actually does have some significance. So in the early or mid-September, we have a lot of independence for our Central American brothers, sisters, and other siblings. And, we have, like I said, Central America, we have Mexico, and that goes all the way up until mid-October. We have more Independence Days in South America as well. So I think we have a month. It's kind of offset between 2 months, but it's still a celebratory month where we celebrate music, culture, food, history, our small businesses, our hard work as the Latino community here in the United States and even globally. And so I think it's super meaningful for me, where it's, of course, celebrating where I come from, my people's history, and I really hold it close to my heart.
Oh, that's wonderful. Cynthia, what's your take on it?
I think for me, I definitely lean into my Latinidad a lot. So I think that on that aspect, it gives me more time to pause and kind of celebrate. I will say that I think not many people know about why it's between 2 months. So even myself, as a Latina, I didn't really realize it until very later, much later on. And I would always be like, why do we get half of 2 months? Right. It doesn't feel whole. And I think that's an issue that happens a lot with our community, where we're not really informed. And even as a whole in the US, folks don't know that about why it's those specific dates. Right. And so I think it also creates this sense of inequity, we're not enough to have a full month in the US. When in reality, if there is a reason behind it, but because it's not showcased or even celebrated in that way, generally, it's hard to kind of grasp and explain. I think it works well for us at Fuqua because we kind of start a little bit later into September, so it allows us to celebrate the whole month, but it definitely isn't something that I've really leaned into much prior to kind of coming into business school, I would say.
Yeah, I feel the same when about Black History Month. It's February, which is the shortest month, so I always kind of question, but still it's an opportunity to share culture, to educate, and so appreciate your two different perspectives. I think that's important. Talking a little bit about, you talked about Latinidad, let's talk about identity. How do you each identify? We were talking a little bit about this, and for me personally, I'm really curious, right? Latino, Latina, Latinx, lots of different ways of identification. And just wondering kind of, how do you personally identify? And then when you hear these terms, how does that resonate with you? And what are other ways in which we might be thinking about those terms?
Yeah. Well, I personally identify as Latina. Okay. I think it's funny because actually I went to UCLA and my undergraduate degree was in Chicana and Chicano studies, and it ended up being we call it Chicanao or Chicanx studies. Okay. But I think this question boils down to how we identify Latinos in this country in general. Because I shared with you all earlier, my dad immigrated here when he was 13, so he was an unaccompanied minor, and he started checking boxes fairly early on for paperwork, for all these things, and he would tell us about how when he first got here, there was a black box and a white box. And he was always told, you check the white box. And then as he started getting older and started realizing there's more of those, Latinos who were not exactly white, they were created in another box. And so then he would check the other box. And then there was more of us. And so he realized, okay, then they added they were trying to figure out how to add another box. And I think at the same time there was the Chicano movement, the Black movement. And so this term of Chicano came about, which is you're not quite Latino from Latin America, but you're not quite American. But it was supposed to be an empowering term. And at the same time, the U.S. was really trying to decide, how do we create a box that actually encompasses what these folks are. In the 60s, folks were really kind of taking ownership of the Chicano term, but it became really politicized, and it came to be seen as a radical term And to this day, there's the Museum of Tolerance in LA actually has the Mecha movement, Chicano, in that museum, kind of denoting it as a very political and radical term. In the 80s, the US decided that they were going to officially create a box of Hispanic, and now we see the non-Hispanic as well. But at the same time, I think the Latino community was coming to terms of like, we need to name ourselves. And the term that we gave ourselves is Latino. Now we've come into an area that's into a time that's like a lot more progressive, and we're talking about gender dynamics and gender norms, and so it pushes the boundary further, right? I think for Latinos, we often use the term Latinao, which is like Latino with instead of at the end it'd be like an @ sign. That would kind of encompass everyone. But like the progressive movement felt like that wasn't enough, and so that's kind of how the term Latinx came about. And although I think it's a very academic term and a term that does, is very inclusive, I think it's mostly used in like elite spaces. I will say, like, when I go back home, and I don't know about you, Tomas, like, I don't really use that term. Right? Like my dad would be like, what is that? And so I think there is a disconnect between like the general community and the academic community and how we use these terms and identity. And so I love that you asked us like how we identify ourselves, because I think that's because we're not a monolithic community, it's a lot more personal term for folks. So although I do use the term Latinx here on campus and to kind of make sure that I'm being inclusive, I personally identify as Latina, and I don't use the term Latinx when I'm back home.
Yeah, no, Cynthia broke down the history beautifully, and I think when we look at all these terms, it's even different when we're looking at different languages as well. So, we have so many choices, but what does this mean between English, Spanish, Portuguese, other indigenous languages? So especially here in the United States, within English, we have Hispanic, Latino, Latina, Latinx. In Spanish, we have Latino, Latina, Latine, so it ends with an E because it works better with the language. And in Portuguese, we have Latino, Latina, y Latini. So many options. But I think what it boils down to is that you want to feel empowered by the way that you identify. Personally, for me, that's Latino. I think I carry that with me everywhere I go. It's very embedded in everything that I do and wherever I, who I talk to, what I do. So Latino works, for me. But of course, I can see that, if I'm in a larger group, people might not identify the same way. And so if I'm here in the United States, here at school specifically, I feel the same way. Latinx just rolls off the tongue naturally in that sense. But if I'm back home, definitely have to go back with Latino. The family will be like, what is Latinx? Kind of just, keep it old school in that way. But yeah, I think we should respect, of course, each other in our different terms. There's a lot. And, as the years come, I imagine it'll even change even more. But yeah, that's, I guess, a little breakdown of all the terms.
I love it. And so if I use Latinao, would that be appropriate?
I think no one would feel offended by the term.
Okay. So, speaking of your Latinidad kind of sense, how did that influence either one, your thinking about wanting to pursue your business degree, and then coming to Fuqua? Like, how did that play? Did diversity and inclusion play a role in your decision to come to Fuqua, but also did your Latinidad, am I saying this correct?
Yeah,
Latinidad influence your even wanting to pursue your business? And you touched upon it a little bit, that it absolutely very much did. But if you wanted to talk a little bit more about why Fuqua, that would help.
Yeah, I think for me specifically, it's complicated because I think being a Latina in California is very different than being a Latina in North Carolina. I think being a Latina in California, there's like so many of us, and my hometown is mostly Latino, like mostly Mexican at that. I think you grow up with this sense of pride, of like real fulfillment, of like, who you are. And even when I went to UCLA, like I remember feeling really like there was a huge cultural shock. I was the only one from my hometown to go to UCLA. I felt very alone. There was more people on campus than there was in, my hometown. And I think it made me feel a little bit ashamed of where I came from because I didn't have the nice cars. Like there was classmates of mine who had Maseratis and who were getting driven by like drivers, chauffeurs and all these things. And I think it just made me really realize how different my experience was from a socioeconomic status and then also being brown. And I think that like with the time that I spent at UCLA and working at a multicultural center, I came to feel empowered by that identity. And so when I was looking at business schools, I was looking for a sense of diversity. I think that's definitely something that drew me to Fuqua. I remember so it was the only actual in-person event I got to go to before the pandemic happened. It was actually a Fuqua event that happened in LA. And I got to meet all of these women the alumni ranged from like alumni who had just graduated that year to alumni who had graduated like 10, 15 years before. And it was this really sense of like age diversity. There was quite a few folks, but I didn't see any Latinas there. So there was, we had a Black alumni, we had white alumni, we had other alumni, but I didn't see any Latinas there. And that initially was a red flag for me. After getting accepted into Fuqua, I went into a deep dive looking for Latinas, if I'm going to be honest. I don't think we have a ton of domestic Latinas on campus or, in the program. And so that was a huge red flag for me. But luckily, I was able to connect to the Black Latino MBA organization, one of the co-presidents was a Latino, and he connected me to a Latina who was in his class, and she connected me to a Latina who had just graduated, and they connected me to an alumni who was a Latina, and I think that allowed me to feel like, okay, even if it's just one of them for a class, like if they could do it, I could do it. And it allowed me to feel like, okay, I can commit to Fuqua and hopefully kind of change the culture there and attract more Latinas into the space.
Which you are doing.
Which I am doing.
What about you, Tomas?
No, that's great to hear, Cynthia. I feel like our journeys are very similar in that sense. For me, coming straight from undergrad into a Master's of Business Analytics program, I already knew off the bat that the representation wasn't there. If you look at the fields of data science, machine learning, analytics, the numbers are low and even lower for, Indigenous and Black communities as well. So coming here, I will also say, like, in high school, where I went to in Texas, 99% of us were Latino. In my undergrad in San Antonio, a little lower, around 20%. But then I came here to Fuqua, and I was one of two in a class of over 200 students in the Masters of Business Analytics program. So I knew right off the bat, at times I did feel homesick, some imposter syndrome, but I think that's normal for all students here at Fuqua at some point. But it took me a while to say, at least to accept that, it would be a disservice to myself to make community with me and the other Latino student in the MQM. I had to use this as an opportunity to educate, share my culture with all my classmates as well. So I've enjoyed sharing music, the spicy food that I love to share with my classmates, the history, telling, of course, the good and the bad that comes from Latin America and even here in the US as well. And I think up to this point, I've been proud of myself for doing that and, sharing this with my classmates, that I'm happy to do it for the rest of the year that I'm here at the MQM. And I think that's what pulled me here at Fuqua. All the classrooms in the MQM program are global. We have people coming from all over the world. So it really mirrors what we see in a professional setting. You're not just going to be working with Latino people unless you're working in Latin America. So it really sets us up to see what is the future looking like within business. And even more so, it even prompts the question, someone asked me a week ago, what's been the highlights of my academic experience here at Fuqua? And I shared that in my business communications class. I gave a speech about how the shifting dynamics are happening here in the United States. So by 2050, we're going to become a majority and minority country. And all this growth is coming from the Latino community, right? So what does this mean for businesses? This shift is happening. You cannot stop it. So especially here at Fuqua, learning about business, how can we be prepared for the future as business leaders, making decisions in a real setting? So
that's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Well, I'm so glad to hear that you're getting so much out of this 10-month program, right?
Hey,
you're packing a lot in in a very short period of time. I'm gonna ask you. You touched on this notion of, it's a little bit of a question you might not anticipate coming, but you touched on this notion of domestic-born Latinos, right? And maybe the experience being a little different than someone who perhaps was born in Latin America. Can you talk a little bit about that, how that shapes kind of your experience in the program? Because I think everyone feels affinity with folks that they feel affinity to, right? And so what is it about kind of looking for individuals who have more of a shared experience as you? How does that impact you?
Yeah, I think of Latinidad in two ways, specifically in the context of Fuqua. It's like domestic Latinos and international Latinos, right? We have two very different lived experiences. And in my domestic bucket, I include like folks who were born in Latin America who came to the U.S. At a very young age, or at an age that helped form them as their opinions and their thoughts and their processes, because I think that in itself also makes it unique. But I think the experience, at least my experience as being a domestic Latina, it feels like what I call ni de aquí ni de allá, which means like not from here, not from there. I'm often seen not Latina enough to be from Latin America, and I'm very often seen not American enough to be American, right? I'm very much firmly like a Latina, I'm Mexican American. I grew up in the U.S. I was born in California. I feel like I had very much the American experience, but at the same time peppered with this amazing culture of being Latina and knowing my roots and being able to go back home to Mexico, and which is a privilege. Not all domestic Latinos get to have that privilege, right? But I think that in itself is a unifying factor. Like I think for Fuquans who come to Fuqua, often not knowing how much of their Latinidad they can share or they can lean into, it can be very complicated, because Latinos are just not monolithic, right? So you can't look at somebody and be like, you're a Latino. We are Afro-Latino. We are oftentimes white passing. There's such variations within us that, like, for me, being a domestic Latino, the true identity is just like feeling like you don't know if you belong, but knowing that you belong with this group, if that makes sense.
Yes, totally.
Right? And I think I really want to, like, when I talk to folks on campus, it's like, that's what I'm going for. It's like, I want you to understand that, like, there isn't like a strict line. Like, it isn't like, if you speak Spanish, then you're Latino, but if you don't speak Spanish, you're not Latino. No, that's not it. It's like a feeling. It's like, do you feel like you're Latino? Do you feel like, even I had a student during Fuqua Friday, the first Fuqua Friday, tell me, she's like, well, I'm only a fourth. My mom's half Mexican. It's like, I'm white, but like, she's like, but I understand Spanish, and like, I love our culture. And I'm like, you're Latina. You don't have to question. You shouldn't have to feel like you question yourself. And to me, that's what being a domestic Latino means. It really is living in, like, my identity is so fluid, because I'm never enough for any space, but I know that I'm enough to be what I am.
Yeah. And hopefully you feel that ability to be authentic wherever right here. Yeah. So I think that's what's really most important. However you're feeling, being able to be your authentic self in this space, which is important. Can we talk a little bit about what your typical days are like? You guys are two different programs, right? And I'm just curious. I think the audience would be curious to know what's your day like, Tomas?
Absolutely. I can right off the bat say no 2 days are the same ever. I think apart from classes, also when I came here to Fuqua, I know classes were 2 hours and 15 minutes long, but I will say the professors are amazing. They're amazing at making sure we're not falling asleep. They're always engaged. I had this one professor kind of jump all over the floor, play with some rulers to make sure that we're really engaged. But apart from that, I would say very similar to back home. If I'm not in class, I'm with my group. So everything's super community-based, which makes me feel, like I said, that sense of home. So I'm always with my group doing homework and working on projects. The other day we did some Polaroid photo shoots as well. So of course, apart from that is making sure that we are growing together as a cohort within the analytics program. And even from there, I leave Fuqua, of course, go back home, cook every day. That's something I've been diving into here at Fuqua, kind of learning how to make different recipes from all of Latin America. So I've been pretty proud of going into that part of myself as well.
Your culinary skills.
Absolutely.
Huh? Yeah, you have to check out Tomas's Instagram takeover too. He shared a typical day on Instagram, so check that out.
Absolutely.
What about you, Cynthia? You have a really busy, as a second-year MBA student.
Yeah, I'm going to echo Tomas, and like no 2 days are the same. This term, I decided that I was going to take all of my classes Monday, Thursday, which in my mind meant that I would have more days during the week to recruit and to do all of my student leadership stuff. What it really means is that people see an open calendar and want to add some time on my calendar. So I'm really busy. I am taking 3 classes. I'm re-recruiting, and I'm co-president of the Black and Latino MBA organization, as well as VP of Internal Affairs for our Low-Income First Generation Experience Club. And I'm also a Case I3 fellow.
Oh, wow.
So I've signed on to do quite a few different things, all things I'm passionate about. So it means that like I have one-on-ones with students to talk about social impact and custom recruiting. I get to talk to students about being Latino on campus, help with recruitment, talk to prospective students, help orient our first years, plan conferences for our Blimbao community. I stay pretty busy, but and I will say I am not as good at getting home and cooking because of it, but I really got to enjoy, and I think the biggest tool you get from any business school is time management, and I feel like my second year I think I've learned to master it.
Yeah.
Right, sounds like it. Talk a little bit about, because you did something really interesting this summer for your internship, so talk about that. And then you talked about kind of re-recruiting. So what are you looking to do? And then Tomas, you're in a really unique and fortunate situation that you have kind of secured a job after school, so you could talk about that. But maybe Cynthia, start with your internship.
Yeah. So I worked at Redif this summer, which is an impact investing firm. They invest specifically in employment social enterprises. And so I was a Farber Fellow. It's what they call their summer internships. And it's a fellowship because it's a learning opportunity at the same time as a job. So my summer project was to consult for an employment social enterprise, actually an hour away from my hometown, so I got to be really close and kind of spend the summer with my family. But the crux of it is helping this social enterprise solve a problem. And so I got to do organizational design this summer. I really enjoyed the work I was doing, but at the same time I had like sessions during the week. So I was learning about like double bottom line, double materiality, impact investing, trust-based investing, venture-based investing. So I know all complicated terms, but how do we do good basically in business? I really loved my summer. I got to do so much really great work, and I actually just got hired to actually implement the recommendation I provided this summer.
That's great.
Which is it's a very unique experience, and so I guess I did a good job because they want me to actually implement my recommendation.
That's awesome.
And I think my biggest takeaway this summer was the fact that like I really loved solving a problem. Right, I came in and I'm not an expert in organizational design, but they saw me as an expert, which meant that I had to like very quickly catch up and understand what I was trying to do and then meet the objective, right? Like make sure that I was hitting the deliverables, understanding what data I needed to collect, how to analyze this data. And it really just got me thinking of the fact that I had kind of written off a lot of different career options when I came to Fuqua because I was so focused on like, I wanted to be a purist. I want to do social impact. This is what I want to do. But taking a step back after the summer, I realized like what my long-term goal is. It's like helping solve this really grand issue. And the only way that I can do that is by like understanding how to like get in and problem solve on a very specific way. And so I'm pivoting, and I'm actually doing recruiting consulting right now. Recruiting and social impact consulting, and then more traditional consulting. So we'll kind of see where I land, but I'm also talking to a couple fintech firms or a couple startups and thinking about like, okay, how do I approach it in that way? I really care about capital and how we move capital. And so I'm very open to, where I end up. But my biggest initiative is like how I want to make sure that wherever I land is a place where I'm going to be growing and really pushing myself out of my comfort zone.
Oh, wonderful. That's great. Oh my goodness, congratulations. When do you start? Are they going to have you start now?
Yeah, so I'm actually going to be at National Black this weekend, so I'm going to be tabling for them there, and then we're going to be negotiating kind of where and I start, because I do want to make sure that I get through this little recruitment phase right now. And so ideally I'd start like in November, but we'll see where we land.
Excellent. That's awesome.
There you go. And then for me, I would say I'm fortunately the first person in my entire MQM cohort to secure and accept a job offering. So I'll be returning to Dell Technologies in Austin, Texas. So I've been working with them for the past couple of summers as an undergraduate and graduate intern within their global operations, so their supply chain. So I'll be returning with them full-time within their supply chain immersion program and specifically looking into supply chain assurance. So in a globalizing world, there's so many, especially with supply chain nowadays, COVID, all the disruptions, right? And even geopolitics. what does that mean for the security of the supply chain, the assurance. So I'll be right there helping, leveraging all the skills and the knowledge that I will graduate here at Fuqua with.
Yeah.
And I'm happy to return there, especially at Dell, since I've been with them ever since I was a sophomore in my undergrad. And I think they really helped me see myself in tech, since I have no family. I also share a first generation identity as well. So like I said, I didn't see myself in tech, but they helped me see that representation. They empowered me. So I'm so happy to go back to the Dell family, and especially be in Texas, close to home, a couple hours away from family. So I'm excited.
That's awesome.
Nice.
Congratulations.
Thank
I know that
you.
makes the 10 months go by a little bit more quickly, smoothly.
Now I see how you can go home and cook. You don't have to recruit.
A little bit less stress. Yeah.
Exactly. You've got all this free time.
Right.
I'm curious, in both of you again, what initiatives would you like to see Fuqua embark on to help either increase Latino either representation or the student experience, improve the student experience? Have you guys thought about anything?
Yeah, I think for me, off the bat, I'd love to see more of mi gente, my people here. I think, especially going back to when I first came here to Fuqua, during this first term for 6 weeks, I hadn't been able to talk to anyone in Spanish. Me and the other Latina in our program were separated in different sections. So I think that increasing representation of other Latinos and Latinas and Latinxes here at Fuqua will be so empowering to the future students and current students who are in our different programs here. I'll even say I'm excited because I recently joined the admissions team as an admissions ambassador. So I'll be helping other prospective students kind of go through that application process. And I'd love to leverage, being bilingual in English and Spanish to help do that, reach out to students across the world who have similar backgrounds as mine, and kind of get their foot in the door here, increase that representation. And I think probably another initiative, when I think about my time in my undergrad, I think something that helped me navigate, an institution, even more so graduate school here at Fuqua, is power mapping. Something that I learned was, to navigate a system, you have to know how it works, right? Who are the different people and different powers, what are their roles, what are their duties, how are they connected to each other? So I think, being Latino and first generation, I think it would help to have those conversations, or kind of like even a diagram, this is Sherry Hubert, Associate Dean of Admissions. This is what she does. If you have any questions about X, Y, or Z, reach out to Sherry, or, the other deans here on campus as well. I think having that knowledge, because knowledge is power, that you accustom more to Fuqua fastly, and you have that transition more smoothly, and maybe you won't have that imposter syndrome or that homesickness, because you know that you'll be able to succeed here at Fuqua.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm gonna say that I do love power mapping. That's something I definitely did a lot at UCLA as well. But similar to you, I think representation is something that I think is really key for me. I also I was only domestic Latina in my section. And in the daytime program, it's like 400 of us, 470, I think, of our class. And I honestly wasn't able to find another domestic Latina until fall, into fall, I think at the end of fall 1, which is already 9 weeks in at this point, because we do a 3-week summer session as well. And so I think it was a very lonely experience, being it's so different when I'm, coming from California, Latinos are everywhere, right? And I almost took that for granted, because I worked in a multicultural center where I had such a diverse group, where it wasn't just Mexican Americans, it was Nicaraguense, it was Venezuelan, it was all of these different cultures. And I think you get used to that, and coming here, and not just, it's very diverse. It's very, very diverse, but it's different when you don't have someone who you feel resonates with your experience, right? Especially with a lot of our international students, we have such different walks of life, and it's not the same, right? Our experiences are just not similar, and their overlap is not as great as it is outside of culturally. And so I think I'd love to, help with representation, and I worked a lot with admissions last year on how do we talk to people, how do we get folks in the door? And then it's how do we navigate, how do we provide a space for them to navigate here in a way that's comfortable, that allows them to, walk away from that imposter syndrome and lean into being a Fuquan. And so I see it as a multi-part change. So one, empowering our students to create space. And so as part of the Blimbao initiative is where we're really honing in our Latinidad. And so saying you're Latino enough, right? Saying like, even if you feel like you're not, like you are, come and join the space.
Yeah.
And I know I personally have been reaching out to folks individually on like, hey, we're here, come be a part of it, like be part of the space. But I do think that there could be more of an effort in terms of administration of creating those spaces of like letting us know, how many folks come in and what that looks like, which I know we have to go through the registrar's office. It's different from admissions. It's a complicated process. So making sure that like we kind of cut some of that red tape and make it easier to have access to that information as student leaders so that we can reach out to folks who feel like they don't have the space. And then the second part is like seeing ourselves in like the staff and the professors, right? Like I know of Ed. Ed is the only Latino staff member that I know at Fuqua.
I think there might be another, but
I'm sure that there might be, but again, that it's like
just seeing yourself in the
and knowing that they exist, right? Like he's the only person that I can think of off the top of my head that's like visual enough for me to like call out even. And in terms of like professors, I don't think that we have any domestic Latino professors that I can think of, and I don't know if you have any in MQM, but like I know at least for me, like I have not had one domestic Latino professor at Fuqua so far. And so I feel like those two things would allow for us to then feel like even if we don't find each other, we know that there's a staff member that we can go to that can connect us to somebody else. We know that there's a professor that like is looking out for us, or that like we can use as a resource, or we can be vulnerable with, and we can say like, hey, I'm feeling this type of way, and hopefully you've been through something where you can at least help orient me.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that allows for there to be a creation of true inclusivity when it comes to domestic Latinos feeling like they belong here, and that they can truly be themselves, which I think I have been offered that opportunity of being able to fully share myself, and I lean into that a lot. But often other folks, if they're more shy or they just feel like not as confident in their Latinidad, they might not lean in because they feel like, well, that's not as, I don't see it here. So I feel like I have to kind of hide that part of myself. And I think that would be a great step in moving that forward.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for both of your honesty and vulnerability. It's something that we all aspire to, right? And so for us, it's, events like this to really allow folks to see what the community is like, what your experiences are like, and to make sure that people are aware that there's space for them here, right? That you can be your authentic self, you can find belonging. I no longer like to use this term fit. I think it's about finding belonging and being able to thrive. We do have, many different folks from different cultures and different countries and different nationalities. But I understand, right? You're also trying to find your tribe, right? You're trying to find the folks who have a very similar experience as you. And so I think collectively, being able to encourage more Latino community members to pursue their MBA, right? To go and pursue their PhDs, because it's not a lack of effort. It's a lack of, people in the space who are pursuing those degrees, right? So we can compete.
And I'll say that, like, I think there are already like barriers that exist in the U.S. that keep Latinos outside of these systems as well. Like, you don't know what you don't know, right? And so I feel like it took me a long time to realize like business school was an option. Because I think growing up, at least for me in my hometown, you think of like success as like a doctor or a lawyer. Like business school, I think is not something that's like naturally comes to mind. And so even like that, I think is part of the barrier. Is like I don't think it's a Fuqua specific problem. I think this is like a business like sector problem. It's like, how do we attract Latinos into the sector and let them know like we're really great at small businesses. I think we can all think of like great small businesses that are Latino, but I think oftentimes it's like the next step that's a lot harder, and how do we attract that? So I will say that like as much as I can say like I wish that this were different and these things, like I also can acknowledge that circumstances and the context into which Fuqua is in is not unique in the sense of like in general we want more Latinos in the business sector.
Exactly. And and it's when you think of business, it can be not social sector, it can be public sector. It can, business is a term, but it's it's the ability to use critical thinking and these skills, and no matter what sector you're in, that is valuable. And it's getting folks to think about that, because even doctors, right? You have doctors and lawyers going back to get their MBA, so the skill itself is valuable regardless of the sector or function. And so making that more, I think, visible and well known across, because the same issue exists in the Black community as well, right? So just getting more folks of color to really know, understand, and feel as though they would find belonging and be able to thrive 100%. In these in these environments, I think is important for us all.
I agree.
Wonderful. Well, our time flies, right? I'm going to ask you guys one more question. You guys have talked a little bit about the things you're engaged in. What do you hope to accomplish before you graduate? That's the last question I have for each of you.
Do you want me to go?
Sure, I could go first. I think, Sherry, I've shared this with you before. For me, I think I really care about like building up our community here. And as co-president of the Black and Latino MBA organization, I feel like it's important for me to like nurture both, the Black and the Latino community. Our Latino community has, not been the strongest, or the domestic Latino, I should say, has not been the strongest in the last couple of years. I think the pandemic really, did a number on us, and it already wasn't a huge like group, and so I think the virtual aspect of it kind of just created more divisions. And so my focus is really in strengthening like that sense of community and leaving Fuqua a better place than when I found it. And so I have quite a few initiatives, but like even this year, we've seen a 700% increase in attendance to our annual retreat. We went from having 0 people go to our Latino conference the last 2 years to now we're taking 20 people to our conference. And so I think I want to continue that momentum and really make sure that I leave the first years with like the tools they need to ensure that community continues to exist after our second year class leaves.
Oh, that's wonderful. Well, we need your leadership, so thank you, Cynthia. Tomas?
I think for me, I definitely want to accomplish 3 things. The first one, of course, when I graduate this upcoming May from Fuqua, I want to take a moment to really think about that moment of I have this degree. I'm going into a space where there's not a lot of representation when we think about data science or machine learning. Models only reflect the people coding it behind it. And of course, you have different biases. So I'm happy that I'm going into that space and I'm able to make my own mark in that change and hopefully creating that pipeline for other Latinos to come in the future as well. So that's one, kind of just celebrated myself in this accomplishment because I feel it's like not just for me, it's for my family as well, for my community. So it's definitely larger than myself. Right. The second one, I would say, I definitely want to do something that surprises myself. What that is, I'm not sure yet, but I will keep you guys updated. But I think I want to surprise myself in some different way here at Fuqua. And I think it's such a safe space here at Fuqua where you have a lot of support to mess up or be super successful in any type of way. So that's my second one. And then third one, I would say, especially with this conversation talking about how can we get more Latinos here at Fuqua or even the Duke community at large, I think especially us, we want to be a part of that change and have these conversations. Hopefully this isn't the last one. Right. And of course, create these mentorship programs, help other Latinos, empower them to come here to Fuqua and carry on the legacy as well.
That's right. That's right. Well, you're doing so much already, and I so personally appreciate all that you do, the success that you've had, the fact that you've really stretched and explored, so much during your time here. I mean, that's what this is about, right? And you're right, it is a safe space. So thank you for all that you do and all that you will do out there in the world because it's really important no matter where folks end up. But what we want is more folks of color pursuing their business degrees, Absolutely. Right? I mean, that's what's important, right? And so thank you for doing what you do. So thank you all as well. Our time has now come to a close. Our first successful Blue Table Talk. As you see, it is real talk. So we really appreciate. Thank you so much, Cynthia. Thank you so much, Tomas. The next series that you'll see is October the 18th. We'll have our next Blue Table Talk, and then we'll have the third one on December the 13th. So we really look forward to having many more fruitful conversations. I hope that you enjoyed today's conversation. I know I did, and I really appreciate your openness and vulnerability and candor. I hope to see all of you back here at our next session. So have a great day, everyone. Bye-bye.